Poor Ben keeps messing up with my name. I tend to use my reenacting persona a lot more on social media than I use my actual persona. So, so I reenact as part of Henry Avery's crew. My normal day is I'm a tailor. That's what I do full time. I pretty much everything you're going to see me, all my clothing wise, I make. So, our group is the Crew of the Fancy, naturally. We tend to reenact mostly in Pennsylvania. That's where 4 of the members of Avery's crew ended up. One of them actually ended up on the Colonial Council, married the governor's daughter. There was a whole big fiasco. And because of the connection with our area, that's why we chose that crew. But when we don't always stay in that era. A lot of times we'll break out into the later parts of the golden age of piracy. Our era is technically the beginning of it. The Red Seamen, they would come over, they'd go over to the Indian Ocean, the Red Sea, they would raid Mughal shipping, and then they'd come back to the colonies. And the colonies at this point, they were very open to all the gold and spices and everything else that were coming in. So that's our focus. Right now, though, I'm going to try to talk more about the golden age of piracy in general. I'm right now wearing the 1706 slop contract jacket, coat, I mean. I'm also wearing trousers. Wow, I got perfect Captain Morgan pose right now. Earlier in the time period, you'd see a lot more breeches. Trousers started to take over, then breeches came back. They're generally cut a lot shorter than what we think of today as trousers or pants. They usually come up around a little bit above the ankle. People like to show off their stockings. So, the slop contract, sailors at this point in time were not actually issued clothing. They would wear what they had. The ships would have what would be a regulation for clothing, and it would come out of their pay. So if I was a sailor, this would have been something I would have had to have bought pretty much out of my paycheck. As a pirate, I don't have that problem. A pirate would be able to take whatever clothes they wanted, and that's where we get into a lot of what pirates did. Figure I'll start with the weapons. This is my hanger. The word cutlass didn't really exist at that point in time. The word cutlass came later. Most of your blades would have been shorter swords, large knives. You wouldn't have had... where's the small sword? Something like a small sword would have required a lot more training. Something like a hanger or a cutlass is something that any sailor could pick up, slash. It's short, so you can use it on a ship. Like, I'm swinging this around my office, and nothing's broken yet. You could use them to cut ropes. Speaking of cutting ropes, that's the primary purpose of this. This is a boarding axe. It was used as a tool on the ship. If you used to cut wood, used to cut ropes. If you had a fire, you could actually use it for fire prevention measures. But in combat, I mean, this makes an actual weapon. It's got 2 business ends. Not something you want to get hit with. Okay, so firearms of this time period. This is a dog-lock musket. It's called a dog because of this piece right here. Flintlocks had already started to be produced, but dog locks were hanging on. This right here is a flintlock. This is much later time period. I will let our local British soldier get into that. But the dog lock here, this is actually how you put this into half cock. It acts as a safety. These actually continue to be used in Scandinavian countries up through the 19th century. They like this feature. Full cock, and here, might as well scare my neighbors. No, I'm kidding. So a pirate, you wouldn't really want to have a musket so much on board, but they were things that were around. You would try to get whatever you could find if you need to use a weapon. I mean, a stick. Sailors are depicted through a lot of times on land with a stick. This one's actually a weighted stick. This would have actually been a purpose-made stick for self-defense. You know, it looks so pretty. The reason pirates were armed was not so much to actually fight people. They could, but it was mainly to intimidate. You didn't want to get injured fighting for pretty much, you didn't know what was going to be on a ship. You wanted to be alive at the end of it to enjoy whatever was on the ship. Things that pirates would tend to go after, of course, there's gold and things like that, but if you weren't really welcome in a port, there's really nowhere for you to spend that gold. A lot of what you find in the records are clothing. Hornigald's ship at one point took hats, coffee, sugar, tobacco. Spices, though, were a big thing, and with my unit, I tend to work, even on the quartermaster, which basically I'm the crew's advocate. We try to actually run our unit officially to a very similar way the pirate crew did, because the system's actually very efficient. We have our captain who looks for events, or in the case of the time period, would help look for whatever ship we were going to go after. You got the quartermaster, advocates for the crew, make sure everybody's provided for. And then you have the crew who vote. That was a big reason a lot of pirates became pirates, was that level of what we think of today as democracy. Part of what I do is I also cook, because I hate to say I'm pretty good at it. During the when people think about 18th century cooking, they think a lot more about basically boiled meat in a pot. They don't think about, there's a lot more to it. Townsend's, I don't know if any of you have seen those videos. Really good channel. They have a lot of great recipes. The only issue I ever had with him is he doesn't have the same fire control as he probably should. If any of you, talking about South Carolina here, I hope you all know how to make a good barbecue. Low and slow. This is where the technique originated, is this time period. It started with the Buccaneers, started with Native Americans. The Buccaneers borrowed it and ended up, their name came off of the Buchan. It's process of slowly grilling meat over fire. If you do it long enough, you can smoke it. If you do it just the right amount of time, it makes amazing barbecue. I've tried to do this at every single event we have. I try to do other things, but people just, for some reason, love the ribs I make so much. Getting back to the food not being boring, during this time period, with spices being so expensive, people would try to one-up each other with the amount of spices they had. They would show off, like, in their food, like, oh, I use ginger, which was actually pretty common, powdered ginger of all things. Nutmeg, paprika was around, black pepper. A lot of this came from Asia, and through the process of raiding ships or trading, you'd be able to get a hold of it. Uh, a lot of Caribbean cooking that, like what we think of today as Caribbean cooking, there's a strong African influence, a strong Asian influence. And it all comes from this time period. It all comes from raiding ships and trading. One of the things a lot of pirates mention when about joining, apart from the democracy, was that they got food. A lot of ships at that time, they tended to cut corners with the food. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about hardtack, which that word was not used. It was ship's biscuits. They're just basically crackers. I tried to have some here, but I actually turned the oven up too high the other night and I can't bake. A lot of alcohol would be part of it. And part of it was keeping your water safe. If you add just a little bit of rum to your water, you kill a good bit of what can kill you. Disease was a big problem. But a lot of the pirates had a habit of imbibing on their alcohol stores a little too much. There's plenty of accounts of a crew being too drunk and running aground or not doing what they should in a situation. Jack Rackham, I mean, that's with Anne Bonny and Mary Read. He was famously drinking down below whenever their ship got attacked. There's several cases where like part of speaking to the preacher before they were hanged, they would say, like, should have avoided the drink. Let's see here. Made a note for myself and making sure I keep with it. On the topic of disease, that was probably one of the biggest, that was the biggest killer if you were alive at this time. Coming from some place like London or Dublin or Edinburgh, and then you're going to the Caribbean, you're getting exposed to a lot of new diseases. Granted, you're also exposing the inhabitants to it, but there wasn't much, at this point in time, we didn't know what was causing scurvy. Some sailors were lucky enough to have limes and citrus fruits on their ships. Several recipes mention using limes for boucan, also for punch. So citrus was known and was used, but they didn't know that's what it was. That was actually keeping them alive in various cases. Not sure if Ben talked about scurvy at all, but one of the first symptoms is your any scars you had, they reopen. Your body just basically starts falling apart on itself. Very nasty way to go, and it killed quite a few sailors during this time period. Pirates, by their nature, ended up with what was called the French pox, which was syphilis. The way to treat that was a syringe of mercury, and let's use your imagination about where that syringe went. Not a good time. That's actually why Blackbeard, that's one of the big reasons why Blackbeard blockaded Charlestown, was his crew was having that issue, and that was one of the major requests in the medical chest that he required to leave. It's a good topic, very good topic, very terrifying topic. Forgot to grab my reproduction one. I have it in a box somewhere. I made one. I made a reproduction syringe, and I'll conclude with a funny story here on it. So my son asked me what I'm doing, and I gave him a very G-rated version. Like, people would get sick, and this would go oh, yeah. Well, the other week, he needed antibiotics, and I pull out the plastic syringe, give him antibiotics, and he starts screaming and running away. Yeah, that was not something that I want my neighbors to hear. Dad, don't put that. So, well, if you have any questions,